Pennine Way is the toughest and wildest long-distance walk in England. For those brave enough to attempt it, it can be 268 miles of mud, sweat and tears. It's grueling, but the rewards are amazing. Just look at the beauty of it. It's magnificent. The Pennine Way was Britain's first national trail. It's a journey along the elevated backbone of England, a major physical challenge, a walk to escape the buzz of modern life. And now the Pennine Way has reached its own milestone. It's 50 years old. In this series, I'm seeing the Pennines in a very different way. But I'm also looking at life along the trail. Just how much has changed since the first walkers set out on the Pennine Way all those years ago. I'm Paul Rose, and for more than 40 years the great outdoors has been my life. I've dived the deepest oceans, spent years running expeditions in Antarctica, and climbed in some of the world's highest mountain ranges. But the Pennine Way is new territory, which is odd. It's just 40 miles from my front door. Well, at last I'm ready to go, and I'm packing up. I've got, what have I got here? Well, I've got my first aid kit. As you can see, it's very heavy on foot protection, particularly blisters. I mean, who knows? That's in there. I love to take these things with me. I can't seem to not take them. I've got my GPS, my headlamp, compass, and even my little Swiss Army knife. If not for emergency, it's good for cutting cheese for those nice lunches. It's a great little place, this. It does feel good to leave. I'm not walking every inch of the route, but I certainly plan to sample the best bits. There's a start. I'm on my way. It can take 2 to 3 weeks to walk all 268 miles of the Pennine Way. Most hikers do it south to north, starting in Edale in the Peak District. The path then drops into the South Pennines. It's then a yomp across the Yorkshire Dales before climbing into the more remote North Pennines. The end is almost in sight, with just an 80-mile stroll through Northumberland and the Cheviot Hills to the finishing line at the Scottish village of Kirk Yetton. Almost 270 miles between here and the Scottish border. This walk, the Pennine Way, has got absolutely everything. Beautiful valleys, flat tops, rounded hills and severe peaks and quite a lot of bogs. It's got to be the perfect place to lose yourself in more ways than one. It's a route with a fearsome reputation. Not only is there the distance, the weather's legendary. In places it gets 2.5 meters of rain a year. Back in the 70s and 80s, when the Pennine Way was a rite of passage for any self-respecting hiker, paths would disappear in a quagmire of mud, and if it wasn't chucking it down, the wind could change the course of waterfalls. And on top of that, I'm told the first day's walk out of Edale is a bit of a toughie. It's time to get some help. Damien.
Hi, Paul.
Hey, it's good to meet you.
Likewise.
Come on, let's take a seat. It's my first day on the walk. I need to know what I've let myself in for. Any advice?
Well, if it was a boxing match, it comes roaring out of its corner and bops you straight on the nose. It lets you know what you're in for, which I think is good. You'd rather that, I think, than a sort of false start where you think, oh, this is easy, and then so you've got a long climb. It's the second most ascent in any day. So there's a stiff climb up Jacob's Ladder especially, and then up on the Moorland Plateau you're probably going to get the winds and you're going to be exposed to the weather up there. So, but you're going to get some great views as well and some real different, exciting things to look at. So it's got everything the first day. It's one of the best days, yeah.
Would you call this one of the biggest challenges in Britain?
I think it's certainly the toughest long distance trail in England, yes. I think it's challenging for anyone. I mean, I do a lot of long distance running. I find it tough, and I've walked like you. I've walked in the Himalayas and the Andes, and this is still a tough walk, but there's a hell of a lot to enjoy in it.
In this episode, I'm following the 42-mile stretch of the Pennine Way from Edale in Derbyshire to Calderdale in West Yorkshire. It'd take the average rambler about 3 days to cover this distance. Not bad when you consider it involves more than 5,000 feet of walking uphill. I love the start of a new adventure. There's a real sense of anticipation, opportunity and freedom. A bit like the old explorers, but because they had no idea what was ahead of them or when or possibly even if they would ever return. But I'm certainly hoping that survival won't be too much of a problem on this trip. The Pennines aren't quite a mountain chain, more a collection of hills that rise to almost 3,000 feet high. But the elevation and remoteness can catch out the unprepared, and it's rangers like Martin Sharp who get people out of trouble. Have you seen some things on this route then?
Yes, interesting sights.
People like me still smiling after the first mile?
After the first mile, yes. After the last 260 odd, not so much.
Well, what kind of people do it?
There's all sorts of different people do it. Naked people.
Naked people?
Naked people, yeah. A lot of people who are not quite sure what they're going into. People carrying huge rucksacks full of tins of beans. But I do find a lot of tents and bits and bats along the way.
Yeah.
But they've taken out the rucksack because it's too heavy and stuff.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
And when you come across the naked people and the ones with 400 cans of beans,
yeah.
Do you give them advice or do you just let them go? How does that work?
You have to. Each situation is different, and I will try and give them advice.
Okay.
And when I was talking to the naked rambler, it was eye-to-eye contact. Because that was just a bizarre sight, and I've still got. Anyway, yeah, you try and help people out. A lot of them are determined that they want to do it.
Absolutely.
And they really, and that's admirable. But sometimes, I always tell them that this place is always going to be here. And if you're feeling ill, the weather's bad or something, just take a step back, think about it, come back another day. It's not going anywhere.
Good advice.
Because really, you should be enjoying.
These days we take hiking pretty much for granted, but it was a right that was hard won in these hills. 80 years ago, Kinder Scout was a place of violent revolution as workers flexed their muscles to demand access to the countryside. For many ramblers, this is their Alamo. Back in 1932, 400 walkers led by 20-year-old Benny Rothman were scuffling with gamekeepers as part of their mass trespass on the summit in protest at their limited access to the countryside. The fisticuffs on the fell side was a key moment in the battle for the right to roam. The tide was turning against the landowners, but not before Benny Rothman and 4 others were jailed for their cause. It was in this era of revolutionary fervour that the idea of a long-distance trail in the north of England took shape. Its architect was Tom Stevenson, a left-wing journalist and campaigning hill walker to boot.
Those of us who have been concerned with projects like the Pennine Way, national parks, access to the countryside, are often accused of being escapists, being impracticable, being cranks. Well, I admit we are escapists.
At the time of his inspiration, he was the countryside correspondent for the Daily Herald and was expected to write an article every week. That he received a letter from 2 girls who were walking the Appalachian Trail in America, and it gave him the idea that a trail in England, following the backbone of the Pennines, would be wonderful.
Let's take a walk and enjoy one of the cheapest, healthiest and most inexpensive pastimes never invented.
Tom was onto something. Hiking was becoming increasingly popular, but it would still take 30 years for his dream to become a reality. Most of the land was in private hands, and some landowners were deeply sceptical of the whole idea.
There'd be fewer objections on the part of farmer and landlords if the general standard of behaviour of the public was higher, and the damage they do and the list they leave without thinking is very considerable.
They didn't want the hoi polloi walking on their land.
So
that was the top and bottom.
There was a bit of a class war going on as well.
Yes, in many cases. We fought for this country, we fought for the rights, we fought to be free men, and we want to walk our countryside.
So on the great opening day in 1965, you were there, weren't you?
I was there with my husband, yes.
What was it like?
You could see hundreds of ramblers congregating, And they came, because the site was in a hollow, you could see them coming from the hillsides, coming down to meet.
Yes.
And it was exciting, it really was.
And what do you think Tom would think now that Pennine Way is 50 years on since it opened? People are still using it as a physical and personal challenge.
I think he would have been very proud. He didn't boast, but I think even he would have allowed himself a little smile and congratulations.
I'm back on the trail that Tom loves so much and heading towards Bleaklow Hill in North Derbyshire. It's almost 2,000 feet above sea level, a world away from the towns and cities that encircle the Peak District. But it's near here that the Pennine Way reveals its first big surprise. Oh wow, look at that. I've read loads about this site and I'm really glad I found it, but I had no idea there'd be quite so much left. Tons of it. This is the wreckage of an American Air Force Super Fortress bomber that crashed in 1948, killing all 13 men on board. And despite the passing decades, it's still easy to identify many parts of the aircraft. You know, some of these shiny aluminium pieces look as if they could have been made just yesterday. But these are the pieces that interest me. This is a huge landing gear wheel and tyre, and it's the size of it gives a great sense of scale as to what kind of aircraft this was. It's a B-29 bomber. I mean, this was the reconnaissance version of the same aircraft that bombed Hiroshima. The B-29 was a strategic heavy bomber that saw action in the Pacific campaign against Japan during World War II. Hostilities were long over when this plane made a short hop across the Pennines. It was travelling from an airbase in Lincolnshire to one in Cheshire. The flight should have been routine, but the hills were shrouded in mist. The aircraft would have come in from this direction, gone that way, and realistically wasn't far off of skimming over the top. Probably only 100 feet or so in it from where it would have first hit here to actually being able to make it. But, you know, quite clearly, you know, touch there, and then, you know, this, it's a big airplane, B-29, and this material would have has been spread all over. Yeah, very powerful experience. Yeah. Bleaklow lives up to its name. Some say at night the ghostly figures of the stricken airmen can be seen on these hills. The story of the bomber is just one chapter in the folklore of this part of the Peak District. In fact, the Longdendale Valley lays claim to being one of the spookiest places in Britain. There have been reports of bright lights on the hills and in the sky. Local place names like the Devil's Elbow and Shining Clough add some weight to the stories. But is it just a load of made-up nonsense? Journalist and author David Clark doesn't think so.
So there isn't just one thing that's seen. You get the type of lights that are reported to the mountain rescue team, which are just like a single ball of fire that's seen over the hillsides. Once, perhaps, twice, a coincidence, or 3 times, something very strange going on. It's a weird place.
But it's not just lights. Witnesses have reported ghostly Roman legionnaires marching across the hills.
You hear stories, folk stories and legends, and you know, you think, oh well, it's just a story that you read about in an old guidebook, you know, mysterious lights, etc., etc. Oh yeah, you know. And but when you actually meet people who have actually seen these things and are absolutely sincere, they've obviously had something happen that they can't explain.
One theory for the lights is the proximity of the valley to Manchester Airport's flight path. But could there be something else going on?
There is this more recent explanation that these lights are caused by earth tremors. New theory involving rocks crushing against each other under pressure, and the valley acting as like a natural battery. And there are other places around the world where these similar lights have been seen.
Whatever the truth behind the Longdendale lights, you certainly couldn't confuse the ghost of the moors for one of these things. Blimey, that's a Huey helicopter. I'm used to seeing them in Antarctica. The last thing I expected to see was a Huey here in the Pennines. This helicopter has been brought in by the conservation group Moors for the Future to help reverse 2 centuries of industrial pollution. Acid rain from factories that once surrounded these hills near Huddersfield has decimated much of its delicate plant life. This is a big project to reseed the uplands. There's so much erosion up here that the natural vegetation can't get a toehold. So there's a 4-stage project that includes grass seed that's designed to fail in 3 years, but it lasts long enough to give the natural vegetation a really good start in life. There's a global issue at play here too. These moorlands store billions of tonnes of carbon, one of the greenhouse gases. Where the peat's been exposed, the carbon is leaking into the atmosphere, adding to the pace of climate change. It's not good for the planet, and it's not a pretty sight either. This is a big loss. I mean, I don't know, what's that, about 5.5 feet?
Yeah, in some places it can be 10, 12 feet, you know, 3,
and over
3,
what
4
time
metres.
scale have we lost that?
Well, Arkwright built his first mill in the 1700s, the world's first ever steam-powered mill, and at that time, from then onwards to probably the 1960s, we had the most horrendous coal smoke here, the most horrendous atmospheric pollution than probably anybody's ever seen anywhere else in the world here.
That pollution made some moorland soil as acidic as lemon juice, killing off many essential bog-building plants like sphagnum moss. These plants are slow growing and are a vital part of the ecosystem. As well as making healthy moorland, they also hold rainwater, filtering it before it reaches our reservoirs.
75% of your kettle full of water has come from somewhere like this. So that alone is a reason to care about it, because when that raw water is collected at treatment works, if it's in poor condition, it costs you and me more money in our water bills for that to be cleaned up before it comes out of our taps.
It's great that we're rebuilding the landscape, but almost 50 years ago we were digging it up, making way for one of Britain's biggest road building projects. In the 1960s, engineers weren't just going over the Pennines, they were cutting through them too. They were building the M62, England's highest motorway, linking Yorkshire with the northwest. At first it was thought hikers might have to go underneath the motorway, but thankfully walkers were allowed to cross it in style, 65 feet above the traffic. When the Pennine Way first opened, the M62 was still on the technical drawing board, but the engineers had to provide some kind of access for the walkers, so they built this structure. It might not be the Humber Bridge, but it's still very impressive. And the M62 bridge isn't the only Pennine Way landmark. There's plenty of signposts and route markers on the Pennine Way, but it'd be pretty hard to miss this one, 120 feet high. This is Studley Pike near Todmorden, which was built during a time of European conflict. It was finished after Napoleon's defeat in 1815, but fell down as the Crimean War started almost 40 years later. It was soon rebuilt and is now a permanent fixture in a land of deep valleys with a rich heritage. In these South Pennine Hills lie the roots of the Brontes and Ted Hughes. It feels like literature and landscape are intertwined. Well, now I've crossed the M62, Barry.
Yeah.
I can feel a very different sort of energy in the landscape here than what exists down in the Peak District.
Well, of course it's called Yorkshire, that's why.
Okay, I get it. But what is it?
Well, it's this, isn't it? It's Millstone Grit. It's this wonderful landscape, and it's a working, solid, industrial environment as well. I think the ghosts of industry in a place like this are still wildly energetic.
Yeah.
You know, the mills. We're walking the Pennine Way. This was a road to work for so many people who had to get to the mills, the tiny little places of work in the valleys. 6 o'clock in the morning, doors were shut at 6:05. Catastrophe if you weren't there. So what we're doing now is that wonderful sort of the industrial ghost of male and female, and I think that's very vibrant. It's still in these hills.
It's great coming up to Studley Pike here, Barry. In my eyes, it seems like a monument to the landscape.
Yeah, it dominates the valley. At this part of the world, it's the dominant sort of monument. But being in my profession, my monuments tend to be more living, poets, writers, the Brontes, Ted Hughes. I mean, just across the valley there in Heptonstall, and just beyond is a tiny, tiny little enclave called Slack. And he wrote this about Slack, called Football at Slack. Between plunging valleys, on a bare back of hill, men in bunting colours bounce, and their blown ball bounced. The blown ball jumped, and the merry-coloured men spouted like water to head it. The ball blew away downwind. The rubbery men bounced after it. The ball jumped up and out and hung on the wind over a gulf of treetops. Then they all shouted together, and the ball blew back. Winds from fiery holes in heaven piled the hills, darkening around them to awe them. The glare light mixed its mad oils and threw gloom. Then the rain lowered a steel press. Hair plastered, they all just trod water to puddle glitter, and their shouts bobbed up, coming fine and thin, washed and happy, while the humped world sank foundering, and the valleys blued unthinkable under depth of Atlantic depression. But the wingers leapt, they bicycled in air, and the goalie flew horizontal, and once again a golden holocaust lifted the cloud's edge to watch them. Just over there, Slack.
Slack never made it onto Tom Stevenson's Pennine Way. In fact, this part of the route has long struggled for recognition.
There are thousands of square miles of country and coast which should be made into national parks, extensive districts to be preserved in their natural aspects and kept for public enjoyment and health. Mountain, moor, forest and heath form nearly 1/3 of Britain's total area, and it must be protected.
Back in the 1930s, when the case was being made for the setting up of national parks, this area between Yorkshire and Lancashire was known as the Industrial Pennines. It was still in the grip of heavy industry and was as famous for its belching chimneys as the view. But the hills around this part of Yorkshire are stunning. So why wasn't the South Pennines given national park status like the Yorkshire Dales or Peak District?
Gorgeous.
I mean, look at this.
The architecture is just fantastic. It's so distinctive to this part of Yorkshire.
Villages like Heptonstall are drop-dead gorgeous. So did the planners miss a trick?
It looks fantastic now. My guess is it perhaps looked a bit different 50 years ago. The textile industry was still here before the Clean Air Act. There's probably been a lot of smoke and mess down in the valley bottoms. And I think perhaps if they came back in a day like today, they might make a different decision.
So as wonderful as it is, I guess it just wasn't pretty enough for them.
Maybe not, and I think different sort of industry. I think the textile industry here was still more active than the lead industry and the mining elsewhere on the way.
What makes Heptonstall so special is that it's not just a pretty Pennine village. Each of these buildings is a window into our industrial evolution. What's the story behind all these cottages, Trevor?
Well, all these cottages were built for weavers, and this was really a hub of industry. It looks very quiet now, but each of these buildings were built for a family of weavers. The upstairs rooms were where the weavers would have their looms, and that's why they've got more windows to get more light in, so they could sit at their looms for as long as possible, producing a piece of cloth every week, take it to market, pick up some yarn, come back and do another piece of cloth.
And I know there's been some recent moves to try and get the South Pennines designated something. Yeah. If not being a national park, then some sort of special recognition for the area. What do you think of the chances?
I think it's well worth thinking about because it's such a distinctive place. And as you say, it looks so different to what it did 50 years ago. So I think they really ought to come back on a sunny day and have a look.
Yeah, I mean, the weather's sorted out, so why not?
Yeah.
Just a short stroll from Heptonstall, I'm back on the Pennine Way and heading for a hidden gem. For 40 years, this farmhouse shop has been a haven for weary walkers. It's much more than Aladdin's cave, it's a treasure trove. And the owner is a bit of a Pennine Way legend. Hey, you must be May. Hello. Sorry to disturb you. I'm Paul Rose. I've been looking for you.
Have you? Have you been lost on the way?
I haven't been lost, but I've heard a lot about you and this great place. And I happen to be flipping starving.
Right. Well, what would you like?
Well, I'd like one of everything. Homemade pies.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. It looks absolutely fantastic. What have you got in here, aside from seemingly everything?
Everything.
And she's not joking. The thing about long distance walking is you're going to need things other than just food and fuel. You need supplies if you get injured or get tired, blisters, all these kinds of stuff. And May's shop has got it. If you get a little cold, there's cold help there. There's stuff for your sore throat should you get it. Headache pills, pain pills. So it's a complete pharmacy supply. It's absolutely essential. And there aren't many places like this on the trail. And there's even, I've just spotted some of this. For a big Saturday night on the trail, some glitter spray for my hair. It certainly lives up to being an Aladdin's cave, a name which was given to the shop by the walkers themselves. When people come in after a few days on the trail, what do they look like?
Weary. If the weather's fine, they're all right, apart from having a few blisters and a few red faces and want some suntan cream and things like that. But if the weather's bad, no, they are weary. But they nearly all carry on.
May's Emporium has served tens of thousands of hikers and been a godsend to walkers from near and very far. Well, Sarah, where are you from?
I'm from Asheville, North Carolina.
Oh, yes. What do you think of this place?
I'm just thrilled to be here. It's great to have all the little things that I need and be able to stock up for the rest of the day's walk-in. So I was delighted to find it.
What do you make of the Pennine Way so far?
It's really, really beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's tough hiking, but it's really, really beautiful.
Even when the weather's a bit wet?
Even when the weather was wet, I still couldn't wipe the smile off my face.
But you're doing the whole thing, right?
I am.
How long is it going to take you?
I think 16, 17 days.
Sarah still has a long way to go, but anyone who gets this far deserves a treat. This is Pennine spring water, good enough to drink, even better to relax in. Oh, this is going to feel absolutely great. Oh. Hang on. That's blooming marvellous, that is. At last. Cool. The first stage of my Pennine Way journey is over, but there's still plenty of miles left to go along Britain's toughest long-distance trail. In the next leg, I'll get a unique view of one of Britain's great natural wonders. And I'll be toasting the Pennine Way in the highest pub in Britain.
From Costa Rica to Southern Africa, helping baby sloths and big cats. Be warned, nature's miracle orphans are seriously cute next. Then the NHS, a people's history from an era of huge social change, from the early 1970s to late 90s. That's at 9.